All right.
Self-censor myself.
All right. Well, welcome, friends. Thanks for coming. It looks like we'll have a nice, intimate conversation, and certainly grateful to Rich for yet again offering to offer some leadership and wisdom and context for our current taboo topic conversation around gender and sexuality, sex identification, and how it intersects with law and with Jewish tradition. So we'll do a blessing, please, for having this opportunity, give some gratitude for having this opportunity to learn together, and invest our curiosity, open minds, and in this space. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu asuk b'divrei Torah. A blessing it is, and a blessing is the source that invites us to figure out how to take our deepest wisdom and insights and integrate them into how we live and speak. Amen.
You want me to lead?
Yeah.
In here? Yeah. Okay. And let me make sure I've got hello, Zoom friends. You're welcome to stay on mute or take yourselves off however you wish. Hi, Kat and Michael, Lauren. I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint and was wondering if you know how to share it on the Zoom meet.
So the green box here is share, and then this, I assume this is the one, right?
I don't think so. I don't think that's the one.
Oh, this is the,
Maybe another one.
You can enable it. Go all the way to the top on the left.
this
Yep, that looks like it. Okay.
one.
So friends on Zoom, can you see the PowerPoint on your screens? I want to make sure everyone can. Okay, good. So it's working. Well, good. So good evening, everyone. I'm Rich Levine, and I was invited to participate this evening in adult ed on the topic of gender identity, loosely framed, and I'm happy to do so. I think the invitation for me had to do something to do with some background and knowledge and information about the framework of law around this topic. And by way of background, I tend to think about law very philosophically. So it is a profession, it's a practice. There are things we do, but law stems from a philosophical disposition called jurisprudence, which is just the philosophy of law, essentially. And so it tends to overlap because jurisprudence will overlap with theology. It will overlap with sociology. It overlaps with political science, with philosophy in general, less so with the hard science fields. It has more to do with the social science. So we tend to spend less time in physics or biology, chemistry, things of that nature. But it's an adjacent field. And to the extent that law has to deal with practical problems in the world that are of more than a social nature, we also find ourselves dealing with science. So we have medical science questions, forces, the physics of forces, things of that nature. So I find myself broadly interested in these topics. I teach both law and philosophy down at Colorado School of Mines. So that's by way of background. And I probably spend maybe 60% of my time in law and 40% of my time in philosophy as a study and practice. Sort of my waking professional hours are more about law, and my recreational, avocation is more in the field of philosophy. So that's how I'm going to frame our conversation tonight. And I would say that this is a really exciting topic generally, because it's much more about the vanguard of where society is and where society is going than many other topics that we have. We find ourselves redefining terms, reconstructing culture around what we're calling gender and gender identity. And if you delve into this topic philosophically, you'll find yourself invited into conversations, into thoughts that are far beyond what we're seeing on, CNN or Fox or MSNBC or, sort of standard outlets, or even beyond what you're seeing in common parlance around, the dinner table, people's sort of everyday concerns. If you actually examine what thought leaders are doing in this field, it's remarkable. And particularly feminist thought leaders, feminist philosophers. And it's not new. The feminist thought leaders, philosophy thought leaders have been working at this project for a long time and doing tremendous work. But we're now seeing the culture move toward some of these things, for example, with the redefinitions in language that we're seeing. So I'm happy to hear all kinds of comments at whatever stage, but I want to walk you through a few idea sets here and see where it goes. Can we take it from there?
Great.
Okay. Any thoughts before I begin?
I just noticed maybe Michael has a hand up. I didn't know if there was a question already or if that was.
Hey, Michael.
That's my cursor.
Oh.
Or this cursor.
Gotcha.
There you go. All right. Thanks. You should have asked that question, Michael. Okay. So I have begun my presentation. I've called it Gender, Liberty, Equality, and each one in question marks, with question marks and in quotations, because I'm really asking the question, socially, philosophically, what are we talking about? When we say gender, what is it that we actually mean? What's the concept that we're conveying when we say that? When we talk about liberty, same thing. When we talk about equality, what are we really talking about there, right? We tend to use these words very casually and very quickly. It's a gender issue. That's my liberty right. You should be treated equally, right? But if you actually dig down into these words, they have a lot of nuance and a lot of power. And so I wanted to talk about law, Judaism, identity, and personal expression. And I wanted to talk about love, kindness, respect, and understanding. So when we talk about gender, I'm really starting initially here to reframe it and to talk about gender as a concept involving personal expression. So if I were a doctor and people were here having an examination and they wanted to talk about a specific medical condition, then sex might be a topic that we could discuss. We might want to talk about DNA sequences or genetic tendencies or the expression of certain hormones and things of that nature. But I don't think that's really what we're talking about here today. It's an adjacent topic and it's connected, but it is still on the periphery in terms of, I think, the central questions that we have going on in society right now. So I want to begin with this. I think most conversations, most inquiries begin very well when you agree on first principles. So when I think about first principles, I think about what you might call a priori assumptions. In other words, things that you believe that are irreducible. So things that you don't reason to or deduce to, but things that you seem to want to believe as a matter of irreducible first principles. And I can phrase out several constructs around first principles. We're in a synagogue. There are first principles of religion that go beyond, I think, conventional reason. Reason may be confirmational of some of these first principles, right? They may be a posteriori, right? So post hoc rationalizations for some of the things that we believe, but they're oftentimes not reducible to the things that we believe ab initio, right, from the beginning. So here's one that I would assert as a first principle. but I would have a hard time proving, right? That I would just say, this just strikes me as true. When a child is born, it should be loved by its family and community unconditionally, regardless of any gender or sex identity, race, genetic condition, socioeconomic status, geographic location, identification of religion, independent of any time in history, fully, equally, and equitably. If you take that sentence and you agree on it, if we agreed on that sentence, and there's other sentences that people could come up with, but if you just agreed on that sentence, it would actually drive a tremendous amount of agreement at the table and at all tables, any Thanksgiving table, in any forum, in any meeting, at any school board, to a place where I think we would come to some very peaceful frame of agreement. Applying that sense of first principle to a specific problem might be somewhat challenging, but it would not be intractable. In other words, we might disagree about the periphery of some policy, how much money to put into some effort, or how to balance efforts to manifesting this with some other things, national security, say, or some other competing value set. But if you could just agree on this, we could get a long way towards understanding all law around this subject, all sociology around this subject, right? So it's a very Pollyanna thing, but it's also important because if you find yourself lost in this conversation, if you find yourself saying, I'm uncomfortable with this, or I don't like that, or I think it should be this way instead of that way, if your position does not square with your first principle begin point, then you have some examining to do, right? One has some examining to do. And you can get to the same endpoint by agreeing on different first principles. So I would ask anyone in this group, online or here, do they find fault or debate with these first principles? And do you have any of your own that you live by? Do you have a first principle that you live by, that you reason through on social questions?
Well, my first thought would be, and I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble reading it. When a child is born, it should be loved unconditionally, regardless of any gender. Does any gender extend to somebody who feels that they were wrongly identified at birth, or somebody who, as they get older, feels like the identity they were given or born with is incorrect? And we're talking about transgender hermaphrodites. How does that figure into this? Because I have no problem agreeing with this at all, but then you have all of these people who feel like this should apply to them, but in society, society looks at it differently when they feel like they're outside of where they were born or how they were identified when they were born. So does this apply to people who come up with something different?
So I love this question, by the way.
Mhm.
I have a limiting principle inside of this first principle, which allows me to get to a more simple first starting point, and that is when a child is born. So let's isolate at the moment of birth. You just have the little being, and forget all of the choices that one might think the being has made along the way,
Or the doctor has.
or the doctor has made. Does this child at birth merit the unconditional love of its family and its community?
Yes.
Right. And would that be regardless of their religion, location? I extended it so far as to say for all time, past and future.
In their lives? Or
No, in the history of humanity.
Okay.
Right. So I love the thought concept here of saying it's a child at birth. And whatever someone called it, gay, straight, hermaphrodite, cis, whatever it might be, does that child deserve unconditional love? This technique of reasoning, by the way, is familiar to us. So I'll get to my legal slide in a minute, but at the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. So self-evident is just an a priori truth. All persons are endowed by their creator. So this is a highly speculative venture, that there is a creator and that that creator can endow, but it's a theological worldview that informs this basic document. You're endowed by your creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's Jefferson's construct. Jefferson's construct is borrowed from John Locke, word for word, verbatim. Locke actually does a much better job with it because he's much more thorough. He's got thousands of pages of philosophical text, right? He's really explored these ideas and sort of reasoned through them in both directions, but it's an irreducible premise that all persons are created equal. Now, you might disagree, one might disagree on the creation part. You could take it out. In other words, if you were to edit down the Declaration of Independence and just simply said, we hold this truth to be self-evident, all persons are equal, endowed with unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you won't have changed the merit of the argument. In other words, all things which flow from the premise would still flow from the premise. I think, right? I don't know why the endowed by your creator is there. Well, I do. No, right. I mean, I don't want to be cute. It is a product of Enlightenment philosophy where they're trying to square the age of reason with 2,000 years or 1,500 years of theological thought. And there's a lot of effort made by Enlightenment philosophers to prove their points and make that resonant and consistent with proofs of God or the existence of God. So, you know, it's a creature of its time.
Mhm.
And maybe that time isn't past. Maybe that time is still now, but I submit that it could still be changed. Does anyone want to offer a first principle? Like, I'm curious what other people's first principles are.
All things are connected.
I missed the comment on the screen.
Oh, can you click on chat?
I think it's next to the leave button. Where it says more, then
The three dots.
Yep.
No, yeah, so you're controlling that screen. It's kind of, and I'm controlling the screen up here.
Yeah, you're controlling that.
There's chat.
Yeah, there you go. There we go.
So, Kat, we are all made in the image of God and worthy of love, compassion, and understanding. Next.
There's Kat. Thank you.
What is the image of God?
Right. This is your second koan of the night. I love it.
My second what?
Koan.
Yeah.
So that's his department.
Sorry.
That's right.
I tried.
Well, if you're made in the image of God and you do self-exploration, then presumably you're finding something about the essence, right?
Yeah.
It means that you're deserving of kindness, love, and respect.
But I think that saying in the image of God is not a universal. Universal. I don't want to say truth or whatever, but. No,
It's like endowed by your creator.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm. And so when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was developed, so this is post-World War II, we tried to come up, Earth, right? Humanity tried to come up, civilizations tried to come up with a declaration of what all human rights would be. So this was the response to totalitarian regimes in World War II. A UN is established. and a group of philosophers and scholars effort valiantly to come up with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And they do. And at the end, the authors of this are quoted as saying, we have reached an agreement. We don't know why we agree. In other words, there are multiple points of view that all agree on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is international law. But some people believe in it because of a Hindu belief, or a Muslim belief, or a Jewish belief, or an atheist belief, right? Or just standard philosophy, right? Political science. So we don't have to agree on the language of the creator and the image of God. But I suspect that if Kat were here, she would translate image of God into some normative concept that we would all agree with. The image being that of loving kindness, compassion, justice, mercy, honesty, charity, right? All of those virtues. And we would say, well, if that's Kat's concept, it's good enough for me, right? That's my hunch. So Jamie's is connectedness of things. And by things, you include all objects and forms and energies.
And peoples and beings like, yeah.
And nature, 'cause-
Mhm.
yeah, I got that out of your other things.
So I'll move to the next one.
But so what does? So when the UN and was adapting or adopting these principles, where did and I'm not real clear on atheism versus agnosticism, but where did they come into all of this? And when the words are creator or God.
Inside of the Declaration, I don't believe they use the words creator or God. What they say is all persons should have freedom of religion, right? All persons should be endowed with the ability to speak freely and to, it's a whole list of 15 or 20 things we should do. What we should do a night on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I want to show you something that's interesting. Has anyone seen this before? Okay, you have? All right. So, and everyone on screen can see it. So watch. Do we have audio on?
You may have to enable audio on your screen share. Let me see.
I can tell the group what to watch for, and it'll be okay.
Okay, I'll just share sound. There we go.
Nice. All right, let it roll.
So is there?
Just click on it. Should work. Oh,
Mhm.
you need to go back one. I'll take care of it.
Okay, I'm not sure.
If I open another tab, what will happen?
It should show. Oh, we'll have to do it.
Stop the share for a minute.
Share. And then if you have to copy the link and put it there in the tab. And then you'll have to screen share.
Okay. All right, Jamie, I'll let you take it over from here. You just roll it back to 2 seconds or so. Gonna screen share it, I think, right?
Yeah.
You want to hit pause there for me? You know what? I can skip it.
No, it's okay. I'll get it. No more sec. Give me a sec.
All right.
I think. So share sound. Let's see.
That should work now. You want to hit that? Yeah. Let me start it again here. 1 second. How come I don't get to? Oh, no.
Can
Sorry.
you put your cursor on the red dot and drag it to the left?
Here we go. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. Okay, how many did you count, Jamie?
14.
Oh, I counted 10.
12.
Okay. And on the screen, you can see it was 15. What else did you notice?
There was this strange creature in this.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't notice him.
You didn't see it.
No,
Did you see it?
Yeah, an 8 or something.
So it's
really.
you probably saw it because you noticed it when we were fiddling around. Some astounding percent, well over 50, don't see it. It goes right past. Here you go, Debbie.
The gorilla. Right there. Oh, yeah.
Walking through. And you're looking for the white. Right?
Oh, that's
You're
amazing.
looking at the white.
I
strips.
showed 2 people in my office today that I work with. Neither of them saw it. Neither of them.
Because we're so focused on, we follow directions. So,
So Jamie, can you make it go back to my slideshow here? Which one of your screens? So the
I
point,
saw this black right in the middle.
the point of this exercise really is that we tend to see what we're looking for. And if we are philosophically inclined towards what would be known as empiricism, we're looking for data, confirmational evidence that we can measure that we've seen, right? Science tends to be an empirical discipline. You still need to share the PowerPoint, yeah. So if you're looking for 2 genders, that's probably what you're going to find.
Not close.
And there is a kind of phenomenology of starting to see the things that you're actually looking for. In other words, it might not be that there's only a black team and a white team and a basketball being passed, right? It might be that that's what we see because that's what we're looking for. It might be that what we see is 2 genders because that's embedded into the cultural norm. In other words, that's what lives inside of our vocabulary, and it's what lives inside of our history. It's the embedded assumption. We have embedded assumptions. We had a heliocentric view of the world, right? We had an Earth-centric view of the world for thousands of years, and we interpreted all data around that until someone came along and said, that's not the way the data really proves itself out, right?
Sun rises, the sun sets.
The sun rises and the sun sets, right? And really no such thing, right? No such thing. The sun never rises and the sun never sets, apparently. Right, all of that, or in a Newtonian world, right? That everything that we pick up drops because of this thing, right? We don't conceive of a quantum physical reality because we don't live in a quantum physical reality. And until we train ourselves to look differently and see it and be open to other truths and other realities, right? Other ontologies, other ways of gathering data, we don't see it. So that's what I would start with here is, are you certain whether gender is a natural fact? Or are you certain that gender is a social construct? I'm open to hearing both sides of this question or other sides of this question, but are you certain? Are you certain that gender is biology? Are you certain that gender is DNA? That it lives at the cellular level? That somehow it's destined and immutable when a sperm and an egg materialize, right? And similarly to my friends who argue gender is purely a social construct, I'd say, are you certain it's entirely a social construct? Are there no natural pairings of a binary gender construct, right? Like maybe we need to have our eyes open and understand that there might be some gorillas and unicorns around it.
What do you do with the binary way it's set up now, where you have to either accept that gender is a natural fact, or like the or part versus an and part?
The way I approach it is by using context. So if I'm at the doctor, I need a prostate exam, and my gender is going to be appropriately defined as male for the purposes of that. My wife goes to the doctor, she has a different genetic thing, but outside of that, there are almost no prostate exams or breast exams equivalent where I have to do anything in the world. Like, I wonder whether, for me, seeing you as a human being rather than a white male, or seeing other people outside of the premise that I know something about them because. And the problem with seeing male and female is that it has come preloaded with a tremendous number of definitions that are hard to escape. So if you ask people, make a chart of all of the masculine traits and all of the feminine traits, it's very loaded, right? It's very coded already. So for me, male and female, the binary, I think it's relevant when I go to the doctor, right? That's when it's relevant. When I need to know genetically what's being passed down with a predisposition for disease based on a mother's genome or a father's genome, then I need to be candid about that and I need to be there, right? That's what about you? What do you?
Yeah, I guess I was questioning the or more so like a both and.
Yes.
Can you accept with certainty this and this as coexisting in the same context or shared perspective?
Yeah, well corrected. Yep. And the second question I have is, are you certain whether gender identity should or should not be treated as a natural fact or construct with no legal distinction? In other words, should the law account for gender in some way, shape, or form? Whether as a, should it deal with gender at all? And you say no, or you shake your head no. Even in the face of prior discrimination?
You mean in a corrective sense?
Yeah.
Well, then in that case, I would say yes.
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge.
Help me define.
Want to live in a world where we need to be.
Right, if we could go back to the first slave ship and say, not on our shores, right? And we never had racial problems, then we wouldn't be living in a post-racial world. We would be living in a world that never had to account for racial discrimination. If we were living in a world that had never discriminated, didn't have glass ceilings, and worse, right? Then we wouldn't be accounting for gender in law, I think, right? It's the patterns that we're breaking, I think, that give life to the laws we're creating.
You coming up with your next sermon?
How do you put? I can get through that part of it, but when it comes to equality and athletics, for example,
Mhm,
that one really throws me. I don't know what to do with that,
mhm.
because I can understand a female wanting to be on a football team and playing. But then what about a male wanting to be on a female basketball team, and is that fair? And then you get to the whole fairness
But
piece.
they're,
It's like,
they're both happening now, and it's the female to male, being on a male team is almost like Darwinism. It's gonna be a natural selection where it's gonna be self-eliminating and eliminating, but there are transgender males who are on women's basketball teams, and that's creating problems,
Yeah.
so if there's no definition of that, yeah, I can see if you take out any kind of gender discrimination, is it self-correcting or self-determining? I don't know, that's a good question.
Let me think about it. I've asked Jamie to answer 3 questions here. So I've created the genesis of gender. It's a cute title.
It is a cute title.
It is a cute title. And I've said, okay, so we have worldviews, and we're talking about some of them. We have economic worldviews, philosophical worldviews, historical worldviews. Jamie's an expert in the theological worldview and many other things as well. So let's go to the next slide. So we all have a worldview, and most of us, I think, at some point in our life begin to develop some fluency in it. A lot of people, when they go to college, they'll say, I'm a major, I'm a psychology major, and you'll say, oh wow, you see the world through the notion that you can decipher a human being by understanding the idea sets in their head, right? Not their physiology, their psychology. And you ask them, well, what kind of psychology do you subscribe to? And they'll say, Freud. I think I'm a Freudian. All people go through stages of development, anal, oral, phallic. And here's what happens. And if you're repressed, this is how you listen to your dreams. Other persons might say, well, I'm a Skinnerian, and I believe that you're a black box, and you're the sum total of the good and bad things that happen to you in your life, and the rewards and the punishments, right? And you go down the hall and you meet someone else, and you ask them what their major is, and they say, I'm an economist. I value efficiency, and I like, free trade, or what have you. I meet political scientists, and somewhere along the line, people start to say, what makes sense, right? What have I learned that actually, can I describe all human behavior by understanding psychology or physiology or something else? And Jamie has made himself an expert in a worldview of theology, and specifically inside of it, Jewish theology, other theologies as well, right? Buddhism, I know you have expertise in, and I'm sure many others, probably atheism too.
Now, I would say the 2 fields that I would like to bring to this conversation have to do with sort of different eras of Jewish civilization, biblical civilization, what we know of it, what we have retained is the Hebrew Bible. And the approach of the Hebrew Bible, it was in a milieu of theism and gods and pantheon, and on a leading edge of a certain form of theology. But primarily, the stories that get translated into gender questions are in the field of myth making. And myth making is, in a nutshell, this is Rabbi Art Green's definition, an attempt of a civilization to translate its deepest truths into stories. Right? So it's the opposite of creating a falsehood. This is taking what you know is true, your axioms, right? Your core affirmations, and saying, well, okay, how do I convey that in a story? So the first story that addresses this question is the first story, right? The story of creation of the heavens and the earth. And so in Genesis chapter 1, the culmination of the 6 days of creation for the 7-day week, is this passage in verse 27. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam, and God, Elohim, created the human, b'tsalmo, to use the phrase Kat invoked, in its image. B'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, or in the divine image, bara oto, it created him. Zachar unkeva, which is usually translated as male and female, probably masculine and feminine is better. Bara otam, created them. It comes across in the English pretty well, but in the Hebrew, it's even more dramatic, of a deliberate ambiguity of both singular and plural, and masculine and feminine. There's no other honest way to read this text. That's my personal opinion. And some have read it saying, God created the human beings in 2 genders. But if you look at this, if it just wanted to say that, it would, right? God created a male and a female, period. But this is not what this text says. So from this text, the earliest commentators on this, borrowing and blending with Greek philosophy of the first human was an androgyne, right? Was both genders, was male and female. And this is an ancient Greek myth of the du partsufim, and that the first human, or they have a name for it in rabbinic literature, Adam Kadmon, the original human, or the earliest human, was male and female, like androgynous. And that in the second story of creation, in chapter 2, where God, the conventional interpretation is God took the rib out of Adam and made Eve. And they say, no, it's the word for rib also means side. So they were the masculine and feminine were one being, and God pulled them apart. So then now you have Zachar u'Nekava, masculine or man or woman, separate sexes, living as separate entities. But the original formation of humankind as being this idea that we have of sort of a spectrum of sex and gender is written into this verse, right? Created it, them, created male and female, him, her, together. And when the separation of the 2 beings occurs, God asks Adam to name, and it says, I'll call that one Isha, because it comes from Ish, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Basically, it's the same matter. Um, and so this is the biblical source, right? To try to put that truth of gender fluidity, we'll say now, into a narrative frame. So it's not scientific language, but in a story frame. So that's how they tried to do it. Two different stories about how the human were created, and then the reading of it, meaning sort of this is the earthling is gender fluid, sex fluid, and non-binary. And through this act of pulling them apart, separating them, there's a construct now of male and female, or of him and her, or woman and man.
So
But that's not part of that's not the original form.
was the original form neither gender, and it was separated into two? It sounds like the original form was a male that the female was created out of.
That is a conventional Christian reading of Genesis chapter 2 that doesn't take into account this verse in Genesis 1. And what I'm saying is the conventional, the prominent rabbinic interpretation is that it was a male, Adam, and out of it came Eve. Adam means earthling,
So there was
It's-
just one creature with no sexual identity.
or both sexual identities.
I had, and help me out. I had understood the imaging of rabbis, early rabbis, to be that it was a creature back to back. Male organs on one side, female organs on the other, and two faces.
And where did you get that from?
It's a combination of early Greek and Jewish rabbinic mythology.
Yeah, there's a
that
Greek
they
one as well.
integrated. There's a Greek one as well. And so, and in the Midrash, it has the Greek word du partsifin.
Mhm.
So there's a sense of this is an understood truth, and here's how that Greek myth is in our text, is what they're saying. So then the rabbis, who are not just in the business of myth making, but in the business of creating law
You're right.
and society, then they try to apply this principle in law. So they come up with a total of 8 different gender identities. So
How did I
here,
not know this?
Yeah, I'm thinking the same.
This is so much why we're having adult
I
ed.
mean,
yeah.
I've never heard
So-
that before.
So this is from myjewishlearning.com. It has a very succinct, so I pulled this up. Thought non-binary gender was a modern concept. Think again. Ancient Jewish understanding of gender was far more nuanced than many assumed. The Talmud, a huge and authoritative compendium of Jewish legal tradition, contains no less than 8 gender designations.
By the way, I want to just get you to pause for 1 second. Jamie says Jewish legal tradition, right? So he says we're moving away from myth making now, and now we're creating specific rules for governing a society, for governing a community. 8 genders by law.
Yeah.
So that had to come out of a need to create more than 2. So
Any-
there was some need to create multiple, right?
Yes, well, you have it occurs both, and it's sort of operating within an inherently sexist system, but where you have male slaves as being worth more than female slaves, and you have marriage law, and you have law, different responsibilities based on if you're a female or male in terms of gender, and birthing biology or non-birthing biology. Anyway, so many of these are, some of them are biblical categories that they're deducing,
And
but
when you say biblical, do you mean Talmud?
no, I mean the sources in the Bible, like you
Torah.
have, yeah, well, not all Torah, but in the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, like the book of
Okay.
Esther
Okay.
has, Surisim, eunuchs. Right, so what gender is a eunuch? their genitals have been removed, right? So, so you have zachar unekeva, that's the male and female. You have androgynous, right? This has had both female and male characteristics. So we read that verse, that was considered the first human being as androgynous. We have the concept of intersexed, right? It's uncommon, but we have a congregant, CBE congregant who's intersexed, has both genitalia, Tumtum is asexual, right? Has neither, and biologically, not by surgery.
Mhm.
The Elonit Hama, identified as female at birth, but later developing male characteristics. The Ilonit Adam, which is the reverse. And the Saris, which is usually translated as eunuch, identified male at birth, but later developing female characteristics. So that's probably through surgical means. And then Sarisa down the reverse through surgical means. So those are all, at least 1800-year-old categories in Jewish law.
It's a
And
lot of gorillas.
a lot of, well, no, because they weren't guerrillas at that time. I mean, in some ways, Greco-Roman culture recognized this. I mean, both with its comfort with homosexuality and a recognition of, both, a spectrum of sexual identity.
Right.
And
And I just
behavior.
mean seeing all possibilities.
Yes, yeah, but there's a less likely, when I'm only looking for white shirts, I miss the black gorilla.
Mhm.
When you're only looking for male and female,
Right.
you miss all of the spectrum in between,
And
right?
there was human intervention. I mean, obviously in the ones that are identified, there was, but society back then, there was human intervention to create the different sex, which sort of blows my mind too.
It's hard to know what the
humanity-
intent between, some of the intent like of, castration and that was so that you would have, servants in a harem that wouldn't be at risk of, defiling the brides, right? And so there's certainly some of that. But
Or Sopranos for the Catholics, right?
yeah.
So I asked Jamie these questions. Oop, did we miss someone? I know.
saw what happened for some reason.
I just need you to go back to the screen share with you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, I should
Did you say there was hot water?
Yes,
Okay.
there's. and
So
there's-
that was the easy question.
it's the-
Number one.
Yeah.
The red thing on the top, and there's tea bags on the right side.
Do you want
You don't have to hew to the script, by the way.
to? Okay, yeah.
But just as thoughts, the questions really for us all to think about, right? So the questions, it's too hard to read. If we stand on one foot, summarize all Jewish thought on the subject of gender equality, of course, it's impossible, right? For one person to do in any lifetime. But he's given some highlights to it, right? And why 8? It may be purpose driven. It could be motivated viewing of 8 as opposed to a quest for some objective ontology and truth, right? 8 might be the number that was meaningful for living in sacred community, but there might have been 12, right? What do you call people who are, haven't matured or never matured into their genitalia, right? Like there could be all sorts of things that one might look toward, right? Or people who are not concerned with biology and law. And this is where I'd like to see some of our conversation go. Like we're a little fixed on biology and law. Or even the role of sport or other sort of cultural phenomena, right? What I'm more interested in as adult education in the context I'm presenting is humanity, of the expression of personal identity, of you living your life, of independent or not dependent upon the opinion of others to define you as a this or that, whether it's in 2 categories or in 8 categories, because I'm not sure that that's the purpose of living an American life today, right? I wouldn't want to have to cite myself into 8 categories any more than I might want to cite myself into 2. I understand why 8 categories might have served a purpose, just like I understand why 2 might serve a purpose. But even in sports, right? We have sports, we divide sports up, many of them by weight class. Weight can be the relevant determinative, right? Height could be the relevant determinative. It could be that in some sports, hormones are the relevant determinative, right? Rather than external genitalia, right? Indeed, we don't like people taking hormone shots for some reason because it skews the competition, right? We may need to be more nuanced in how we factor that out. Because I'm running low on time, I'm going to keep going. Is that
Sure.
okay?
Yeah.
And sorry for being delayed. So here's the question as a practical question. Where are we today? Are gender behaviors protected by law? In other words, forget whether we're talking about genitalia, right? Forget the binary question of whether you can discriminate against another being, whether government can discriminate against another being based on their genitalia. Let's ask whether the expression of gender identity, my sense of who I am, your sense of who you are, is that protected by law? That's a more interesting question to me. And the answer is yes. So the next question is why and how? I've gone over the Declaration of Independence already. The Declaration of Independence is not law. It's kind of statement of purpose. The Constitution is law. And the 14th Amendment to the Constitution begins to address this problem. And that's an interesting idea temporally, right? We don't see this in 1776 or in 1787. We don't see this until after the Civil War. So the United States has now gone through a very tumultuous period of time, and there's a legal response to this terrible war that consumes nearly 700,000 persons. And we amend the Constitution, and where we amend the Constitution most substantively is in the 14th Amendment, where we say you have 2 things going for you now. You have liberty at the state level. In other words, no state can deny you liberty. And you have equality. Now, most people come to this conversation thinking about equality. We want gender equality. I'm going to shift the framework for you, though, and invite you to think about gender liberty instead of gender equality. In other words, forgetting whether there's a historic pattern of discrimination against a discrete and insular minority, right? That's usually the definition of how you get to an equality problem. But whether you just have the inherent liberty to not be discriminated against based on your choice of gender. And what you find is the Constitution protects that. And we begin through the Supreme Court from about 1865 forward to actualize that, to put some definitions on it, to deal with the question of what is liberty, right? What is liberty? And then how many more words can we add to it? And are we going to add some words to it that include gender identity? Right? Because liberty is a very broad concept. Ask a libertarian, well, it's the right to do anything I want to do, so long as, you know, the edge of my fist doesn't touch the tip of your nose, right? That's a classic libertarian type of idea. Meyer versus Nebraska. Liberty denotes not merely freedom from bodily restraint, but also the right of the individual to contract, to engage in any of the common occupations of life, to acquire useful knowledge, to marry, establish a home and bring up children, to worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience, and generally to enjoy those privileges long recognized at common law as essential to the orderly pursuit of happiness by free men. Happiness translates to a Greek term that really means fulfillment. So it's not just the expression of joy, but the expression of fulfillment. So it's a very broad idea what this liberty could be. In Bowling versus Sharp,
Are these
are Supreme Court
cases.
yeah, and if anyone's interested, I've posted this on my website. I'll give you the link, and you can click on, you can click right here. Here's Meyer versus Nebraska, and it'll come up to a nice little website called OYES. And what they'll do is they'll tell you the facts of the quick case. Nebraska passed a law prohibiting teaching grade school children any language other than English. Meyer, who taught German in a Lutheran school, was convicted under this law, convicted of teaching a language. Did the Nebraska state statute violate the 14th Amendment due process clause? The court declared that it was unconstitutional. So that was an early case. And then how do I get back, Jamie? I want to go to, I'm so sorry, I don't know how to do this.
Maybe I can do this.
It might be that one. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you were there.
And you can do it from the pad.
Okay. So the next case was this is interesting. Bowling versus Sharp is a case, if I remember correctly, and I think I do. Yeah, one of these two cases is actually about beating children in schools. Whether you can, right? Whether that's a denial of liberty. This one is about integration, whether integration, we usually think of integration as the first case would be Brown versus Board of Education. That's an equality case, a violation of equal protection. But Bowling versus Sharp is interesting because it's a DC case, which means it's not about states, it's about the federal government. The federal government is not charged with equality. Sorry for going late, you guys. And the answer is, bye. The answer on Bowling versus Sharp is integration is a liberty right. The next case is about teachers not being able to hit children, or conversely, teachers being able to hit children. And in this case, they ruled that you could hit the children because you had a good reason. That's the way this case turns.
Because or if.
If, but in this case, they could because. This was a 5-4 decision, not a very good example of American. So I'm going to rush here because I can see people should want to go.
No, he just wanted to see, he was skiing all day. so
Okay.
he's-
I'm not.
I'm not.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, if I'm droning on.
Fascinated.
No, I think this is great.
Okay, so short course in law, Constitution, you do nothing about equality, you do nothing about liberty, you fight the Civil War. After the Civil War, you amend the Constitution, then we still struggle with equality because we still have all kinds of discrimination, gender discrimination and racial discrimination. And we finally get to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. When you talk about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, you've moved from constitutional law to statute. So this isn't in the Constitution. This is the power of the Constitution given to Congress to create laws, to create remedial laws. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 does so much good for this country. And what it does, in short, it's got 11 different titles in it. So it's a very substantial piece of legislation. And through its 11 titles, it banned discrimination and segregation based on race, religion. It says natural origin. I think it might be national origin, and sex in employment in all public places such as schools, hotels, restaurants, churches, and hospitals. So it uses the term specifically here, sex. It's banning discrimination based on sex. It's a slightly different concept than gender. And at that point, the law was responding very much to a feminism that was speaking to the biology of sex in the binary male-female context. A series of laws in the 60s and 70s expanded on this, by the way, to do age, as well as Americans with disabilities. So disability, the Act of 64 gets expanded. and applied currently. So this is as early as 2020, which shows you, as I said in the beginning of this, how much at the vanguard of change we are right now, right? Bringing you to 2020, in this case, Bostock v. Clayton County, Georgia, the Supreme Court held that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, prohibition on employment discrimination based on sex, encompasses discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, not just sexual orientation, not just the behavior of homosexual conduct or heterosexual conduct, but the way one presents themselves, the image, the behaviors, the identifications, the expressions that one gives. The law now protects, and this is so remarkable and so beautiful, and it's such a nice sign of progress and which way the tide is going. And if you think of how unusual it is that it took you to 2020, you didn't have it before 1865. You didn't have it in 1964. You didn't have it in the 1970s. And in 2020, in a case authored by Neil Gorsuch, Supreme Court Justice from Colorado, in a 6-3 case, it expands the definition of sex to include gender identity. I think it's just remarkable and worth noting. I've listed Bostock here if you want to read the case. I've also given you the United States Department of Health and Human Services Office of Civil Rights. So we often languish around the idea that nobody's paying attention and nobody's doing anything about it. And where is the government in all of this? And I would invite you to just click on this link, because there is an Office of Civil Rights inside the Department of Health and Human Services that responds meaningfully and forcefully to complaints of discrimination, not just on sex, not just on the binary, but on gender identity as well. And this link is, again, I don't want to keep everyone too late, but this link is really impressive. If you look at what this Office of Civil Rights inside the Department of Health and Human Services is actually doing. So
HIPAA too, right?
what's that?
HIPAA.
HIPAA 2 is in there also, right? Your Privacy Act, your access to records. Sorry for rushing. I want to go one step further. This is adding some depth that people get to, because what you think of when you think of law oftentimes is the relationship of human beings to their government, right? So you don't want to be discriminated against by your government. But the question is, what about discrimination by private actors against other private actors? This case here was a profound case, this Heart of Atlanta v. US case, because what it had was, there was a hotel called the Heart of Atlanta Motel, and it was on the border, I think, the Georgia border, and it was discriminating. It would not rent hotel rooms to Blacks. And the United States government sued the Heart of Atlanta Hotel for violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and said, you can't do that. It's vital to interstate commerce. And that's because we live in a world where the Constitution describes narrow powers that the government can act. They can't fix all wrongs. They are limited and constrained, but one set of wrongs they can fix are things that violate interstate commerce. So what's interesting about Heart of Atlanta is we enact the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Everyone at this table and on Zoom thinks of this as racial justice and sexual justice, right? And gender identity justice and age discrimination, all of that. We're thinking of justice. And what the fig leaf is discrimination is bad for business. In other words, it negatively affects interstate commerce. And so they've stretched that, right? Because we all know what we're doing with it, but there is a bit of cynicism involved, right? That in order to preserve interstate commerce, we're going to eliminate discrimination. But that's what we've done, and that's what Heart of Atlanta Hotel Motel does. You can click it and see it there. So what do we have in Colorado? Colorado follows this, all of the federal rules, and we also have our own state enacted laws. So we've gone from the Constitution to the federal statutes, and now we're looking at the state statutes and how they're enforced. And in May of 2021, again, very recent, we're at the vanguard here, Colorado enacted law expanding prohibitions against discrimination. The law calls out the need to protect all persons regardless of disability, race, creed, color, sex, sexual orientation, and again, I've underlined it here, gender identity, gender expression, marital status, national origin, or ancestry in all places of public accommodation, including school. So we're a place of public accommodation here as well, and there's going to be tension between the law and a person's right to have no discrimination, not here at CBE, but at many religious institutions, and a religious organization's rights under the First Amendment to have their own freedom of association, their own freedom of expression, their own rules of exclusivity based on however they practice their own religions. So religious institutions represent a specific type of problem, but here's another type of problem. Gay wedding cakes, gay wedding websites, right? These all fall into these same issues where you have persons who are not part of a religious community per se, right? Expressly organized as such, but who claim or pretend to a religious practice that would compel them to discriminate in order to fulfill some of their own sense of religious identity. And that's the gay baker cases that you've heard about. So, and again,
But that's a private entity. That's not part of the public sector.
just like the Heart of Atlanta Motel is for interstate commerce.
They go to
Yeah.
commerce.
So in the state, these become places of public accommodations where they are licensed, they're in the public sector. It's different than what's happening in your home. In your home, discriminate like crazy. The state should never reach into your home. But when you hold yourself out to be a law office serving the public, or a dentist serving the community, or a doctor's office, right? Or an architect or a wedding baker, and you're availing yourself of the broad public, the state is saying that you shouldn't be discriminating, right? That's where we are in this culture. So that's where I've ended up.
There's another one that we've heard about recently that goes to, I think it's the county of Boulder. I don't know if it's the city of Boulder, that goes to hairstyle.
Oh,
And that you can't discriminate against somebody based on if they wear dreadlocks, if they have cornrows, if they wear a mohawk. You cannot discriminate against anybody based on hairstyle. So you can take it down to more local levels.
so I want to leave you with resource and then take any questions because I'm supposed to have left time. On this last page, which I can post to you, if you click any of these links, you'll read people with much deeper and better thinking than I've been able to express. Judith Butler, a phenomenal and influential female philosopher on gender and gender identity. She's a professor at UC Berkeley right now. You have perhaps 100 years ago, Simone Beauvoir, a French philosopher, wrote a very powerful and influential book called The Second Sex. And Sojourner Truth, if I click on this, will they hear it? Well, don't do this. Can you hear it? I can't even hear it. You can click on it later or look it up yourselves.
Microphone there and see what that does.
That's okay. So it's just a 3 or 4 minute speech by Sojourner Truth. The history records that this was a spontaneous speech, an extemporaneous speech that she gave, looking at the insanity of discrimination based on her gender. Her speech is called "Ain't I a Woman?" So here you have a Black woman, really marked by racism terribly, but understanding the other term that has become vogue and vogue for good reason, which is intersectionality, right? Where you're not only a victim or suffering identity discrimination in one area, but in 2 areas, right? Or 3 or 4. So as we look around, we don't need to be myopic and look for the hidden the hidden truths about sex. We can also look for the hidden truths about how hard it is to sort of be intersectionally diminished. What I like about the laws that we have right now is how many sections are covered in terms of anti-discrimination. It's not myopic about one source of identity. And I'm happy to take questions, and I wish we could hear our friends on Zoom.
Well, if they unmute, we'll be able to hear them. And you can stop the screen share so we can see them.
Here, I'll let you.
What's your source for the 8 different types of genders? Where did that-
Simple Judaism, I think you said.
My Jewish learning.
My Jewish learning.
Yeah, and you can just Google, you know, 8 genders in Jewish thought, you know. YouTube. Yeah, so if you friends on Zoom, the Schneiders, good to see you. Lauren,
Hey, everyone.
Tara. If you have a question, just go ahead and unmute.
And it doesn't have to be a question, a comment, your point of view.
So my question around the Colorado statute, in particular, in terms of the baker and the wedding cake thing, if Colorado protected the couple's access to, and not to be discriminated from, access to their, why was it overturned by the Supreme Court?
So the first case, which was the cake case, was overturned on procedural grounds, that the Civil Rights Commission hadn't followed the proper steps in order to enforce it. And so the Supreme Court knocked it back down. The second case was the case involving the creation of a web designer for only heterosexual marriages. It was such a fake case because she had never even done a website. It was all propped up, but nonetheless, you know, elections do have consequences, and we have a very conservative Supreme Court, which ruled in this case in favor of what they described as religious liberty. So her religious liberties which are expressed in the First Amendment, right? So they don't even have to be inferred, overrode the so-called liberty rights in some kind of a balancing test of rights versus rights. It's an interesting case, and a lot of couples that I've spoken to about it, they can go to a lot of different websites. So they weren't restricted from marriage, they were restricted from using this one person's stuff. So it was a balancing test.
And that was upheld?
The Supreme Court upheld the religious rights of the computer designer, the web designer, over the rights of the gay couple to have their wedding, create their website created by this woman who was creating websites.
Where did the cake come in?
That was
There
a
were
good-
2 cases.
Oh.
I worry about the cake.
Where's the line between something being illegal and a hate crime? The discrimination versus.
A crime
Hate
versus a
crime.
hate crime?
Yeah, a crime versus a hate crime. So, right, I love it. It's a good question. It has to do with motivation. And so when it's considered to be essentially an aggravating factor. And so if someone, you know, shoots a clerk at a liquor store because they're robbing them, they don't have the animus associated with it, that they're doing it because that clerk happens to be a racial minority or a discriminated gender or something like that. But if you came to a place to shoot at a gay nightclub, for example, born of racial animus, that would cross the line into a more vile type of murder and then would become a hate crime.
Is that what's happening in Boulder, where they're now federally prosecuting the shooter, and not in Boulder, in Buffalo, I think. Is it Buffalo? Where am I thinking? Buffalo, where they're now, the state had one decision, but now they're federally prosecuting him because they want the death penalty based on a hate crime. Am I getting that right?
I don't know about that case. Most crimes are state crimes and not federal crimes.
This just came up in the past few days where they're
Yeah,
going to a federal prosecution.
Yeah, I'd have to look. It feels to me like it's some kind of a civil rights type case, and they're seeking the death penalty.
Yeah, that's why they're going to a federal prosecution now.
Debbie, I don't know about that one. I just haven't followed that
Okay.
case.
It's either Buffalo or Boulder. I can't remember which one it was.
I think it must be Buffalo because I would have heard about it here.
So I have a question, which would be the dumb question, and then I have an observation. Suppose we were sitting around in a room full of Hasidic rabbis. Are they gonna have the same observation about the 8? I mean, that's
They'll be
that's
familiar with those, yeah.
contextual history,
Yeah.
and that's, okay.
Mhm.
That's not a liberal interpretation,
Mhm.
that's.
That's
a
okay.
story.
And then the other thing that I can't help but think about in this discussion. There's a Heschel quote about race, which basically says, race is racist. You know, as a normative legal or political concept is capable of expanding to formidable dimensions. But it becomes a way of thinking that's dangerous. And I can't help but think from sort of my own kind of spiritual guidance or takeaway is that if I should apply, if I could think about gender in the same context, you know, like to genderize is kind of misogynistic or anti-feminism or, you know,
Or misanthropic.
yeah, exactly. I mean, that seems right.
You might enjoy
Well,
listening to the philosophers at the end of this. That one thing that.
Yeah,
we
I also realize, like, as much time as I've spent in the compliance world, I'm not a lawyer, but my career has been in compliance. I think I'm more a philosophy guy than
Yeah.
Maybe that's why it's been such an ungratifying career.
That's the quote that I wrote down that you said before was that, you know, the patterns we're breaking are those that give life to the laws we're creating,
Mhm.
that they become, that categories like race and gender, because those binaries have been used and abused, right? That we need to in somehow engage or recognize those categories, you know, as social constructs in order to break them down.
Right.
Right, that,
When I think about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and how she had to spend her life pushing back against nonsense when she could have spent a life doing so many other things, it makes me physically sad to think that someone had to do that. Grateful that she did, but sad that she had to. But I think that's what you're saying. If nobody discriminated based on race, we wouldn't need all of these laws. If nobody discriminated based on gender identity, but we have social facts, right? Many of these facts are social facts, and that's why I distinguish them from the biology cases, because I think the biology cases are so easy, right? And it's not just about gender, it's about age, and it's about you know, genetics and lifestyle and choices and accidents, right? We go to the doctor for all kinds of different reasons. It's not because of how you were born. You came out of that womb and suddenly we loved you like a boy or we loved you like a girl, right? Like, it makes no sense, right? We loved you like a human. We loved you like a child. That's.
yeah, I mean, I think that piece is my takeaway tonight, that really helpful. You know, there are situations in which a sort of binary sex, right? Y's chromosome, two, you know, X and Y chromosome and X chromosome, you know, they aren't universal. Sometimes you have mixing. It's not, you know, there are blends in between, but there are functions that we go, like the doctor or whatever, in which those are functional and useful categories. And that doesn't mean to deny the variety of gender expression, transgender, transsexual identity. I think the whole like thing around, you know, the comments of Harry Potter author, right, J.K. Rowling, and the backlash and stuff like that, like, you know, that kind of delineation would have helped, you know, sort that conversation out. The last thing I would just ask about is around the just plethora of anti, trans legislation that's been flourishing in many states.
In many states.
And just what your read is, is there something beyond sort of pure culture wars, and what kind of antidote there might be to that, both, federally, but also just in terms of the debate.
So I'll say two things about it, I guess. First is, so Kat says that she loves the idea of that we're made in the image, right? In the image of, and if you are made in the image of, and Jamie is correct that the truth contained within the myth is that the image must have been a wholeness with both sexual identities or all sexual identities contained within, right? So if one discriminates against another, through that lens, it's ungodly behavior. It's a rejection of a divine, of a component of a divine, because it was part of the image that was created. In terms of the legislation that we see, I think we are in a very dramatic painful time around culture. And many Americans feel under threat and under siege, and they are reacting defensively to it. So you're seeing this in the South. And if you look at basic progressive legislation that everyone in this room, I think, would agree with, the Equal Rights Amendment, for example, or the current bill that's stalled, that came out of the Democratic Congress but can't get through the US Senate, which is the Equality Bill. What states are against it? They're the same states that, by and large, not universally, there are more states now that fought for the Confederacy in the Civil War. If you want to know why you don't have an Equal Rights Amendment that would have taken care of sex discrimination, all you have to do is look at the states that didn't have it. I think we may be closer now to a US dissolution than a US integration on these points. I think
That's really scary.
I do. I mean, I think the broader culture is seeing the absorption of the change of language. To me, that's more significant. That's a tide that is certainly starting to sweep. I don't think that there's any government that can contain it. I don't think that there's any body politic that can control language. And I think it'll come through the United States. I think it's going to go through Europe. I don't know whether it will be truly worldwide, but it will go through a great number. You're seeing the change in pronouns. That's not going back, right? Those behaviors are not changing, and that progress is not going to be stopped. But I do think you're going to see regressive legislation in southern states that have proven to be resilient is an understatement. They do want to leave this country. That's my opinion.
Did you say regressive or progressive?
Regressive.
Regressive.
Those states are regressive.
Regressive.
They're fighting what they
Yeah.
call a culture war. They don't feel heard. They don't feel listened to. They feel under threat and under siege. The traditional America that they aspire to, they see it in a different lens. And I think I'm using political science. I'm not using my politics here. This is what I see as political science, not this is not me ranting on a soapbox about what we should all strategically do and what the objectives should be or anything like that. It's my answer to the question. I think you're moving away from unification, and you're moving much more aggressively to dissolution. And it may be that genie may be out of the bottle already.
And you don't think it has anything to do with politics?
No, I think that people who are cynical have used this for political ends, right? I mean, it's being digested politically.
Right. Right.
And, you know, I mean, we've been hearing about immigration and, you know, issues like this. These are very animating issues. People will say, you know, that the Bible said Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, right? We've all heard this trope. Right?
Do you think these states were on the road to becoming more progressive and are now going backwards?
Yep, I do. I do. I
And
think,
where do you think that turn was?
Trump never participated in a debate. Okay,
Yeah,
and he just won Iowa by 30
5
points.
minutes.
yeah,
I couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, the
but that's politics. Isn't that politics rather than sociology?
it feels to me more like sociology and culture and climate.
Yeah.
We don't agree on the basic set of facts.
So do you mean sociology, culture, and climate are what's enabling
Yeah,
his rise, essentially?
yep, the politics are just part of
And he
it.
just happens to be there to take advantage.
And you can see the level of disagreement. I mean, there are states that are trying to put him in prison for establishing slates of false electors. And there's a whole nother part of a state that is overwhelmingly for him. And again, right, this isn't adult ed, political science is it's a different subject, but I think culturally, in response to Jamie's question, I think you're seeing it as part and parcel of that same dynamic. It's not isolated to gender fluidity and the use of pronouns and gender reassignment surgeries in public schools and all of that in sports, right? Wherever it happens to pop up. I think it's much broader than that. I think the regressive state legislation is part and parcel. They've already won the question about whether a woman's body in terms of reproductive privacy and choice is going to be her choice, right? Which, by the way, it's a philosophical question of the mind-body duality, right? Like this whole notion that female is subjugated. This is a remarkable thing. And you saw everywhere from 1972 up until 2022 was heading one way, and in 2022, in June of 2022, the tide clearly shifted. And by the way, not coming back. Doesn't matter who gets elected again. Gone, finished. Marriage perhaps next.
Gone, finished for a time, not,
You won't be
Forever.
alive for it.
you don't think?
I know.
I'm gonna live a long time.
You might.
I'm afraid you're right.
Oh, I mean, you could
That's
just do the math.
That's hard.
I mean, how long it would take for the conservative justices to die?
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know, just
yeah.
people sell life insurance for a reason, right? And they price it a certain way. You can look at the Supreme Court on an actuarial chart. Listen, I've been wrong about a lot of things in my life. Maybe on this, but I doubt it.
Not with 9 justices.
Right. Did you see how young Amy Coney Barrett looked?
Yeah,
Yeah,
she is young.
And if you elect Trump again, then, you know, they'll just solidify that majority for even longer.
I think it's inevitable. I really do. I'm so pessimistic.
Yeah.
Can I ask you another question? I love the statement, or whatever it is. The patterns that we're breaking give life to the laws we're creating. Did I write that correctly?
I think so.
And where was that something you created, or did you read that someplace?
That was just came out tonight.
Really?
Yeah, I haven't written it down.
I wrote it down for you.
It's a bumper sticker. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think law often is reactive, but there's also a proactive component. So the 9 justices who wrote Brown versus Board of Education were definitely aware that they were doing social engineering,
Mhm,
but that was prompted by reaction to segregation, right?
mhm.
Which itself is social engineering.
With social engineering. So, I don't want to take up anybody's time. I
I
feel,
could sit here for another hour.
This is great, Rich. Sure, nobody on Zoom? How
Yeah.
about?
Michael or Cat,
Okay,
Cat came up, Cat's on.
we need to
Oh,
make.
wait, Kat, we can't hear you yet. Hold
I-
on,
There we go.
hold on.
I'm a little disillusioned about, well, first of all, thank you. This is wonderful. Apologies for not having my face showing. But I'm disillusioned. I'm sad, Rich, to hear your assessment, because I really wanted to hear in closing a much more optimistic uh, view of what is, something a little more hopeful. It does feel a bit dire. And I want to feel like there's action engagement that is available and accessible, that is effective towards qualitative change. And I didn't hear that at the end, so um,
About the third slide in, Tara,
mhm.
I had underscored the word love because it's a hyperlink. And it takes you to a website called Trevor's website or Trevor's mission. You'll see it. I'll make sure Jamie gets it and it can go out. And that is mental health and all the resources for transgendered people and, the whole LGBTQI plus community, gaining information, awareness, support, funds. So like Tara, thank you so much for giving me the chance, right? I don't think law is the answer to all of these questions. I think that much more of it has to do with the way we engage with one another, with being, with who we see. I mean, listen, I survived 4 years of Trump, I'll survive 8, right? If that happens.
That's okay.
But listen, I mean, I see the kindness of people, I see nature, I have friends, I can do other work, right? To me, I won't let it deter my optimism. But I don't want to fib about the predictive nature of social science, right? The job of science is to predict future events based on data. It's hard, we don't have replicable experiments, but there are reasons to be pessimistic about the next election, no matter who wins.
Yeah.
I'm very pessimistic about the Democrats as well. So,
And there are
Yes.
two pieces of
Can't
Kat,
have
go ahead. We can't hear you.
Who's speaking?
Can't.
She's trying, but she sometimes has issue with you. Maybe you put it in the chat if you have a. So just to respond to Tara's,
Is it Trump? I can't read that.
Trump made it okay to hate out loud, is what she said last week.
Oh.
She said, there are two things, around, you talked about the incredible progress in terms of extending legal protection to sexual identity as well as gender identity. And that, 2022, 2020.
yeah,
That, and being written by one of the conservative, chief justices, or not chief justices on the Supreme Court, Gorsuch, right? So that piece of optimism and what you described as sort of this wave of sensitivity and recognition around the truth of gender fluidity and that as being that's not stoppable.
right.
They can pass as many laws as they want, or reaction with the state laws and restrictions as they want, but it's not going to change the cultural shift that's occurring. And I think the in this case, that core principle about every child, every human being, you know, is deserving of these, of respect and rights, and is, should not be, well, that fundamental principle is one that the truth is on that side, right? There's no moral argument against it.
Right.
And even if the law will take some time to catch up, that truth is going to.
Right. And one does never know, right? We're only 6-7 years post Obama, right? We never saw that coming. We had 8 years of a, you know, fairly progressive, stable, and expansive set of social laws. So it's possible, right? We did work on healthcare, and Obergefell was during the Obama administration for gay marriage.
And the, you know, equal pay thing, Ledbetter, Letty.
Lily Ledbetter.
Lily Ledbetter. Right,
Yep.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think I want to thank you, Rich, for the
Yes, thank
preparation,
you.
obviously, you put into this and the time tonight, and
Thanks, Jamie.
and it's a nice you know, fitting time to do this, and you know, this week of honoring Martin Luther King and the expansion of civil rights, and certainly a timely topic. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
If you haven't seen it, the movie that I think it's on Netflix, about the march being organized was really brilliantly done. And it was a backstory. I had no idea that the main organizers of the march was gay.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
It's really a story. It was beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And created a forum that, you know, everything from marching, you know, for women's rights and just say no to, you know, supporting Israel and everything, you know, marching on Washington as a model for a protest, in contrast to like January 6th, for instance. So great. Nice. So we do have a Beatles Shabbat coming up Friday night, and I think and now I'm blanking on what the next taboo topics is for next month. Do you remember, Mom?
I don't know that it was scheduled.
Okay. I
There
think
was some question about.
that's right. Oh, funds and whether the speaker wanted some funds. Okay, so keep an eye out for next month's thing. It's like this comment, Neil deGrasse Tyson, optimistic. We become more gentle and calm over time. Yeah. Thank you, Kat. Sorry we couldn't get your voice in there, but appreciate it. All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks
Have a
all.
sweet Shabbat.
Bye.
A sweet.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
You almost make me want to go back to law school.